The day my husband fired me, he was wearing the cufflinks I bought him for our 5th anniversary. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. Small, silver, engraved with the letter D for Donovan. I had stood in a jewelry store for 40 minutes choosing them. The woman behind the counter had said, "He's a lucky man." I had smiled and believed her. That was 3 years ago. Now Daniel Holt, co-founder and acting CEO of Holt Meridian Group, sat behind the desk I had helped him furnish. In the office I had helped him design. Inside the company I had helped him build, from a shared laptop and a lease we could barely afford. He had his hands folded in front of him like a man who had rehearsed this, like someone had coached him on where to put his eyes. He was not looking at mine. "We're restructuring the executive team," he said. I set my coffee down slowly. "We are. The board feels the chief operating officer role needs a different profile going forward." The board. 4 people, 2 of whom Daniel had personally selected, one of whom was his college roommate, and one of whom, I was about to learn, had been in a hotel 2 miles from our house 11 days ago with my husband. But I didn't know that yet. I only knew the sentence. A different profile. After 9 years of building this company beside him, I had become a profile problem. "Is this a demotion?" I asked. Daniel finally looked at me. Something crossed his face. Not guilt exactly. More like discomfort. The specific discomfort of a man who has made a decision he cannot defend and knows it. "It's a transition," he said. I looked around the office. My fingerprints were everywhere in that room, invisible but permanent. The vendor framework on the shelf behind him, I wrote that. The crisis protocol binder beside the window, mine. The emergency supplier contact list, laminated and pinned above his monitor. I built that at 2 a.m. during the breach that almost ended us in year 3. None of it had my name on it. That had always been the arrangement, quiet and unspoken. Daniel presented. I prepared. He shook hands. I wrote the terms. He accepted the praise. I accepted the marriage. "Who's taking the role?" I asked. He reached for his water glass. "We're bringing in someone with more acquisitions experience." "Who, Daniel?" He said the name the way people say something they've been holding in their mouth too long. "Kara Sims." I had met Kara Sims exactly once. 8 months earlier at an industry conference in Denver. She had introduced herself to Daniel first, then turned to me with the particular smile women use when they've already made a calculation. Bright, brief, dismissive. She was 34, sharp dresser, fast talker. The kind of person who made every room feel like an audition she was already winning. I had gone back to the hotel that night and told Daniel I thought she was aggressive in a way that felt personal rather than professional. He had laughed. "You're reading into it." Now she was getting my office. I stood slowly. My legs were steady. I had always been good at steadiness when everything around me was collapsing. It was the skill no one ever complimented because it looked like nothing from the outside. "I'll need the transition terms in writing," I said. "Of course. And I'll need access to the vendor contracts through the end of the quarter." "That can be arranged." "And Daniel," he looked up, "the restructuring plan I submitted in March, the one for the Vantage supply chain. I want it noted internally that it originated from my desk." Something shifted in his face. Quick, almost invisible. "I'll have legal look at it." That was a no dressed as a process. I picked up my coffee and walked out. The parking garage was cold. My heels echoed against the concrete in a way that felt too loud for how small I suddenly felt. I sat in my car for 4 minutes without starting it. Not crying, just breathing. Letting the shape of what had happened settle into something I could carry. 9 years. I had negotiated our first office lease when we had 11 employees and no credit history. I had restructured our supplier network during the pandemic, when 3 competitors went under and we didn't. I had written the pitch deck that secured the Caldwell partnership, the deal that put Holt Meridian on the map, in a single weekend while Daniel attended a leadership retreat in Scottsdale. He had presented that deck to a room of investors with my words in his mouth. They had given him a standing ovation. He had called me from the lobby afterward, voice bright with adrenaline. "We did it, Claire. We actually did it." That we had felt real then. My phone buzzed. A message from my attorney, Renata Osei, one of the sharpest acquisition lawyers in the city, and the only person I had called before leaving the building. "Got your message. Come in at 4. Don't sign anything." I typed back 2 words, already gone. Renata had been my attorney for 6 years. She had reviewed every Holt Meridian contract I'd ever touched. She knew the company's structure the way a surgeon knows anatomy. Not because she loved it, but because she had studied every place it could bleed. 3 weeks before Daniel fired me, she had called me about something unrelated, or what I had thought was unrelated. She had asked if I was aware that Holt Meridian had been quietly approached by a private acquisition firm called Palliser Group. I had said no. She had gone quiet in the specific way she went quiet when information was arriving that she needed time to organize. Interesting, she had said, and changed the subject. I hadn't thought about it again until now. I started the car. The office building Renata worked from didn't look like power. It looked like old money that had stopped trying to prove itself. Dark wood, real plants, staff who spoke in half sentences because everyone already knew the rest. Renata was standing when I walked in. That meant it was serious. She only stood for serious. She handed me a folder before I reached the chair. Palliser Group, she said. They've been in quiet acquisition talks with Holt Meridian's minority shareholders for 6 weeks. I opened the folder. How quiet? Quiet enough that Daniel doesn't know the structure yet. He knows there's interest. He doesn't know who's leading the buy. I looked up. Who is? Renata sat down. She pulled a single page from the folder and turned it toward me. At the top, beneath the Palliser Group letterhead, was a name I recognized immediately. Mine. Not as a target, not as a former employee, not as a discarded wife, as the proposed acquisition lead. The folder trembled slightly in my hands. Not from fear, from the specific feeling of a door opening that someone else thought they had locked. What had Palliser Group been watching that Daniel never noticed? And how long had my name been in that folder before my husband put his in Kara Sim's future? The Aurelius Collective offices did not look like fashion. That was the first thing that struck me when Sylvie's assistant led me through the glass corridor on the 14th floor. No mood boards. No fabric swatches pinned to walls. No oversized campaign photographs of hollow-cheeked models staring at nothing. Just clean lines, dark wood, and the particular silence of people who made decisions that moved money rather than admired beauty. I liked it immediately. Sylvie Marin was already standing when I entered the main boardroom. She was the kind of woman who communicated competence before she spoke, not through performance, but through the specific stillness of someone who had never needed to prove herself twice in the same room. She extended her hand. Elena. Sylvie. She gestured to the chair at the head of the table. My chair. I sat in it the way you sit in something that was always yours. Around the table sat the Aurelius acquisition team. Julian Reese, head of financial due diligence, with a laptop already open and 3 folders stacked beside it. Priya Anand, brand valuation specialist, who had assessed the market positioning of every Aurelius acquisition for the past 6 years. Thomas Birch, legal director, who carried the quiet authority of a man who had written ironclad agreements so long he had started to think in clauses. And then there was the file in the center of the table. Holt Meridian, acquisition assessment, confidential. I had not opened it yet. Sylvie had sent it to my secured account 48 hours ago. I had not touched it. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I already knew parts of it. I had lived inside those numbers for years. I needed to see them through Aurelius' eyes before I let my history color the reading. Sylvie opened her copy. Before we begin the full assessment, she said, I want to address something directly. I waited. You were married to Daniel Holt for 9 years. You were operationally involved in Holt Meridian at a deep level for most of that time. She looked at me steadily. The board debated whether that proximity was an asset or a liability. And they decided that no one alive understands the architecture of that company better than you, which means no one is better positioned to see exactly where it is breaking. Julian turned his laptop toward me. The first chart appeared. Revenue curves, brand valuation over time, market position relative to competitors. I looked at the numbers and felt the specific sadness of being right about something you had spent years hoping you were wrong about. Holt Meridian had been declining for 4 years, not visibly, not in the way that made headlines or alarmed investors. The kind of declining that happened beneath polished surfaces, in vendor margins and licensing structures and creative decisions that prioritized Daniel's ego over market intelligence. Julian walked me through it methodically. Supplier attrition, he said, pulling up the first document. 14 of the 22 international ateliers in your original sourcing network have either reduced their Holt Meridian allocation or moved to competitor contracts in the last 3 years. I looked at the names. I recognized every single one. I had built relationships with most of them personally. Late nights on international calls, site visits Daniel had deemed unnecessary, handwritten notes to craftspeople in Lyon and Milan who still believed in the kind of detail that took time. Why did they leave? Priya asked, looking at me rather than the file. Because Daniel stopped visiting, I said, and in that world, presence is a contract. She wrote something down. Julian moved to the next page. The Caldwell Group distribution deal, he said. Your first major European channel. Renewed 18 months ago, under revised terms. I felt something tighten in my chest. What terms? He turned the document toward me. I read the revised clause. Then I read it again. Daniel had renegotiated the Caldwell deal without me. He had done it quietly, 6 months after I had first noticed Kara's name appearing on internal creative memos with increasing frequency. The revised terms reduced Holt Meridian's royalty percentage by 4 points and extended Caldwell's exclusivity window by 2 years, giving them leverage that would cost the brand significantly if they ever needed to pivot their positioning strategy. It was not a renegotiation. It was a surrender dressed as a deal. Who advised him on this? I asked. Julian checked his notes. Internal creative liaison, Akara Sims. The room did not know why I went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Thomas filled the silence. The revised terms create a structural problem during acquisition. Caldwell's exclusivity clause means any new ownership inherits a locked European channel for 26 more months. I know, I said. I wrote the original agreement. I know exactly where the exit provisions are. Thomas looked up from his folder. There are no exit provisions. Not in the version Daniel signed, I said. In the version I drafted originally, there was a material change clause. If the brand's creative leadership changed by more than 50% within a 2-year window, Caldwell's exclusivity could be renegotiated. Priya leaned forward. Daniel replaced you. Daniel replaced his entire sourcing and operations structure, I said. That qualifies. Thomas was already writing. Sylvie watched me the way you watch someone diffuse something carefully. You've been carrying this for a while. I've been watching it for a while, I said. There's a difference. The second half of the file was harder, not financially, emotionally. Priya walked me through the brand valuation section. Holt Meridian's identity had always rested on 3 pillars: craftsmanship, exclusivity, and the particular story Daniel told about the brand's origins. The story was partly mine, not in any legal sense. I had never been credited. But the narrative that Holt Meridian used in every press profile, every investor deck, every carefully staged interview, the story of a brand built on obsessive attention to quality, on relationships with artisans, on a belief that luxury meant permanence rather than trend. That story had come from conversations Daniel and I had in our kitchen at midnight, him talking, me shaping, both of us believing we were building something that would outlast us. He had kept the story. He had removed the person who understood it. Priya set a photograph on the table, a campaign image from 4 years ago, the last collection I had been operationally involved in. The craftsmanship was visible even in print. The fabric sat differently. The light caught detail that later collections had stopped reaching for. This is the collection that defined the brand's peak valuation, Priya said. Every campaign since has underperformed it. I looked at the photograph for a long moment. I know, I said quietly. I remember the atelier in Denver where that fabric was sourced. Daniel didn't come on the trip. He said it was a detail visit. No one spoke. It was never a detail, I said. By the time we reached the final section of the file, the room had shifted. Not dramatically. Just the particular shift that happens when people stop presenting information and start listening to someone who lived inside it. Sylvie closed her folder. The board wants a full restructuring plan before we move to acquisition signing. Creative leadership, supplier restoration, licensing correction, and brand repositioning. She looked at me directly. We believe you are the only person who can write it. I thought about Daniel at the settlement table, the expensive pen, the word mercy sitting in his mouth like something he had earned. I thought about Kara in my chair. I thought about the atelier, the fabric that caught light differently because someone had cared enough to travel for it. I'll have the first draft to you in 72 hours, I said. Sylvie nodded. There is one more thing. She slid a single page across the table. It was the acquisition guest list, the signing meeting. Every name that would be in the room when Aurelius Collective formally took control of Holt Meridian. I read the list slowly. Daniel Holt, Celeste Holt, Daniel's mother and board member, Dominic Voss, family attorney, Grant Holt, Daniel's younger brother and minority shareholder. And at the bottom, beside a title that had not yet been formally approved, one more name, Kara Sims, proposed, creative director. I looked at that line for a long moment. Then I looked at Sylvie. She submitted a proposal, Sylvie said carefully, through Daniel. He recommended her for a transition role. I set the page down. Pull the last 18 months of her creative output, I said. Campaign performance, atelier relationship records, supplier feedback, and internal approval chains. Priya was already writing, and cross-reference every vendor decision she touched with the atelier attrition data. Julian nodded without asking why. They did not need me to explain. The numbers would explain it. Numbers always did, eventually, for people patient enough to let them speak. I picked up my bag. The room watched me stand with the quiet attention of people who had just understood something important about who they had hired. Sylvie walked me to the door. In the corridor, she spoke low enough that only I could hear. "How long did you know the company was in trouble?" I looked through the glass wall at the city below. Somewhere across town, Daniel was probably celebrating, probably pouring something expensive, probably telling Kara that the hard part was over. "Since the Denver trip," I said. 3 years ago. Sylvie studied me. "And you stayed." "I was protecting something," I said. "The brand?" I thought about it. "The people who made it worth protecting," I said. "The craftspeople. The suppliers who kept their word. The junior staff who believed in what the brand was supposed to stand for." Sylvie was quiet for a moment. "That," she said finally, "is exactly why you're sitting at the head of our table." The elevator came. I stepped inside. 60 days until the signing. 60 days until Daniel Holt walked into a room expecting an acquisition meeting and found the woman he had handed a settlement to sitting at the head of it. 60 days. I had spent 9 years being invisible. I could survive 60 days. Marcus opened the champagne on a Tuesday. I know because Priya found the photograph. It had been posted to a private industry account. Not public, but not private enough. A celebration dinner at Maison Noire, the kind of restaurant that required a phone call from someone important just to get a reservation. Daniel at the head of the table. Celeste beside him in another pale outfit, her hand raised in a toast. Grant, his younger brother, grinning with the specific joy of someone who believed money was about to arrive. Dominic Voss in the corner, allowing himself a rare smile. And Kara. Kara at Daniel's right hand, in a dress I recognized from our last Denver trip together. Not because she had been there, because I had seen it in his luggage when he returned. I had not asked about it then. I understood now why I had not needed to. Priya slid the photograph across my desk without comment. She did not need to add one. The image said everything about what Daniel believed the next 60 days would bring him. He thought the settlement had closed the story. He thought the signature on those papers had purchased his clean beginning. New creative director, loyal mother, compliant brother, a brand that would carry his name into a merger he believed was already written in his favor. He thought the hardest part was over. The Aurelius files arrived on a Thursday. All 18 months of Kara Strand's creative output, pulled and cross-referenced, not because Sylvie had asked me to rush, because once I opened the files, I could not close them. Every damaged supplier relationship was a name I recognized. Every dropped quality standard was a decision I could trace back to a specific moment when I had no longer been in the room. By 4 a.m., I had built the full recovery framework. Supplier restoration sequence, which ateliers to approach first, in what order, with what terms. Licensing correction strategy, the material change clause in the Caldwell Agreement. The legal pathway Thomas had confirmed was still viable. Creative repositioning, not a reinvention of the brand, a return to it. Back to the standards that had built the Heritage Credibility Index before Kara had treated craftsmanship like a talking point rather than a practice. Leadership transition, the most delicate section. Every name, every role, every consequence. I did not write Daniel's name with anger. I wrote it with accuracy, which was worse in its own way, because accuracy left no room for argument. I sent the plan to Sylvie at 4:47 a.m. She responded 11 minutes later. "Still awake?" I typed back. "Finishing." Her next message came quickly. The board reviewed the preliminary. They want to move the signing date forward. I set my phone down and looked at the restructuring plan on my screen. 114 pages, every number sourced, every recommendation evidenced, every consequence documented. Daniel was telling journalists about his future. I had just written it. The call came the following afternoon. Not from Sylvie, not from Julian or Thomas or Priya. From a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. "Elena Holt?" The voice was careful, male, measured, speaking. "My name is Grant Holt," he said, "Daniel's brother." I said nothing. Grant's voice dropped slightly. "I know about the acquisition. Not all of it, but enough." A pause. "I know you're involved." My hand tightened around the phone. "I'm not calling to threaten you," he said quickly. "I'm calling because—" He stopped, started again. "Daniel doesn't know what he's walking into, and I'm not sure I want to watch him find out the hard way." I let the silence sit. "Grant," I said finally, "what exactly do you think you know?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I know Kara has been moving money," he said, "through creative budget approvals. Two-sided creative briefs that did not reflect actual vendor fulfillment. She shifted capital out of the manufacturing reserves into a shell consultancy. "Get me the documentation," I said. "Let me do the rest." That night, Daniel posted another photograph. Him and Kara at the Holt Meridian Atelier in the city. Her hand on a fabric sample, his arm around her shoulder. The caption read, "Building the future of the house." 412 people liked it. I looked at the photograph for exactly 3 seconds. Then I opened the restructuring plan and added one final section. I labeled it simply, Financial Conduct Review. It was the quietest thing I had done all week. It was also the most dangerous, for every person in that photograph who believed the future already belonged to them. The morning of the signing, I arrived 40 minutes early. Not because I was nervous, because I wanted to see the room before anyone else did. I wanted to stand at the head of that table in the quiet, before the air changed, before the doors opened and everything that had been building for 9 years finally arrived at the place it had always been moving toward. The boardroom Aurelius had chosen was nothing like the room where Daniel had handed me the settlement papers. No family portraits, no legacy tokens. By the time the Aurelius team was fully seated, the room felt settled, purposeful, like a sentence that had been carefully constructed and was finally ready to be read aloud. At 9:47 a.m., the doors opened. Daniel entered first. He was mid-sentence when he crossed the threshold, speaking to Sylvie beside him, one hand gesturing with the easy confidence of a man who had already written the outcome in his mind. Then he saw the room. His hand stopped moving. His eyes traveled the table. The Aurelius team, the sealed folders, the name cards, Sylvie at the side position, Thomas with his legal documents already open. And then his eyes reached the head of the table and found me. The sentence he had been speaking simply ended. No conclusion, no punctuation. It fell away like something dropped from a height. For 4 full seconds, Daniel Holt said nothing. Behind him, Celeste entered. Then Grant, who looked at me once and looked immediately away, his face carrying the particular expression of a man who had known something was coming and had not known how to stop it. Then Dominic, whose legal instincts registered the room's configuration immediately, his eyes moving from the name cards to my face and back again with professional alarm. And then Kara. Kara walked in with the energy of someone arriving at an event they believed they had been invited to shape. Her posture was assured. Her silk blouse was perfect. She was smiling. It told him what kind of room this was. Not a conversation, not a negotiation between people with equal standing. A proceeding, with structure, evidence, and consequence. Dominic leaned toward Daniel as they took their seats, his voice low. I could not hear the words, but I recognized the posture. An attorney managing a client who had just understood that the terrain had changed entirely. Thomas stood. For the record, Elena Holt was appointed Chief Executive Officer of Aurelius Collective Fashion Division prior to the initiation of acquisition discussions with Holt Meridian. Her appointment was sealed under executive confidentiality and conflict control protocol until this signing meeting. Daniel stared at the table. Celeste's hands, folded in front of her, tightened slightly. Thomas continued. During the due diligence period, Aurelius Collective conducted a full audit of all vendor channels, creative brief fulfillments, and executive resource allocations. Thomas laid out the documentation provided via Grant's disclosure. The room remained absolutely silent as the terms of the acquisition were read, reflecting the total transfer of operational authority, the enforcement of the manufacturing reserve corrections, and the complete dismissal of Kara Sims from any future creative or consulting capacity within the new conglomerate structure, due to the documented financial conduct discrepancies. Daniel looked up slowly, looking at me not with anger, but with the look of a man who had finally realized exactly who had built the house he had been trying to trade. I uncapped my pen, signed the execution agreement at the head of the table, and closed the folder. "The acquisition is complete," I said. "Thank you, gentlemen."